Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And when we finish, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story, everyone. Emily Parker hauled 4 mismatched suitcases down the sidewalk while the heel of her left shoe disintegrated with every step. "Wonderful, Emily," she muttered, yanking a suitcase free from where it had wedged itself in a crack in the pavement. Fired, evicted, and now practically barefoot. A real success story. The wind turned her umbrella inside out, throwing another wave of water directly into her face. She slammed it shut in disgust. "Perfect. Join the club, you traitor." Cars rolled past, sending sheets of gutter water across the sidewalk. Emily dodged what she could, laughing in the slightly unhinged way of someone who has run out of other responses. "All I did was stand up for Sophie," she told the rain. "The guy screamed at her, I screamed back, and boom, you're fired, Emily." She mimicked her manager's voice with theatrical disdain. "Sure, because kindness is apparently a fireable offense now." She drew a breath and resettled her bags. And to top it off, Mr. Harris decided that 3 measly months behind on rent was simply unacceptable. "How dramatic of him," she muttered. "Truly, give a man an award. Heartless Landlord of the Year." Her hair was plastered to her face. Her coat had gone from wet to genuinely heavy, and her hands had stopped feeling entirely her own. After a few more blocks, she spotted a bus shelter and collapsed onto the bench inside it, breathing hard. She looked at her own trembling reflection in the puddle at her feet. Red eyes, smeared mascara, whatever remained of her dignity, fighting valiantly and losing. "There she is," she murmured, giving herself a slow, mocking round of applause. The very picture of accomplishment. She tried to laugh. It came out as a sob instead. And then the tears started, falling in rhythm with the rain. And on a freezing New York night, Emily Parker finally let go of the last of her composure. "Seriously, God," she whispered between sobs. "If this is some kind of test, can I get a small break? I think I've already failed spectacularly." She buried her face in her hands and cried, quietly, thoroughly, and alone. Then a light swept across her. A black car, large, expensive, entirely out of place on this street, slowed and stopped directly in front of her. Emily barely lifted her head. Great. Here comes the kidnapping. Perfect ending to a perfect night. The engine cut off. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a face she recognized. The quiet man from the coffee shop, always in a suit, always with that unreadable, serious expression. Richard Lancaster, the kind of millionaire who looked carved from ice, now sitting in the middle of a downpour. "Emily Parker," he said. His voice was deep, level, unhurried. She blinked at him, confused. "What?" She wiped her face. "Oh, perfect. The millionaire shows up at the exact peak of my humiliation. Want a photo for Forbes?" Richard studied her. There was no pity in his expression, just a kind of focused, quiet curiosity. "What are you doing out here like this?" Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. "What does it look like?" "A casual evening stroll. Fall-themed luggage collection." He glanced at the suitcases. "You were evicted. Bingo. 3 months behind on rent. And to round out the day, I got fired this morning. I should probably buy a lottery ticket. Clearly my luck's peaking." Richard was quiet for a moment, watching the rain. Then he opened his door and stepped out, holding an umbrella, and walked toward her with the kind of unhurried precision that suggested he had never once in his life been rushed by weather. Emily watched him approach with open suspicion. "You need a roof over your head," he said simply. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Wow, sharp deduction. Sherlock would be impressed." He ignored the sarcasm entirely. "And I need a wife and a mother for my children," he added, as though this were the most reasonable continuation of the sentence imaginable. Emily blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Come with me," Richard said. "You can live in my house." Her eyes went wide. Then she burst out laughing. "You gotta be joking." She pointed at him. "Or you've completely lost your mind. Seriously, I know a great facility. I can give you a referral." His expression didn't move. "I'm completely serious." Sure. Because nothing says emotional stability like proposing marriage and instant motherhood to a soaked, broke woman who smells faintly of burnt coffee. Richard exhaled. I need to present as a family man to close an international deal. My investors expect stability. A clean image. She blinked, trying to process. So you want me to marry you for marketing purposes? Precisely, he said, without a flicker of hesitation. And in exchange, you'd care for my children. Oh, fantastic. Emily threw up her hands. It's official. The millionaire has completely lost it. He held her gaze. I need someone to take care of my children. No nanny lasts more than 2 weeks, he continued, unbothered. They always quit, and I don't have time to keep searching. Emily stared at him, stunned. And you looked at me and thought, this woman soaked, broke, and emotionally compromised is exactly what I need. Richard offered the smallest of smiles. Precisely. Emily blinked, the rain still pouring down around them. She looked at the empty street, the soggy bus shelter, the heavy suitcases, the cold wind cutting straight through her coat. He started walking back toward the car. Think about it, Miss Parker. Emily watched him turn his back, and panic surged through her chest. Wait, she called, standing up. I accept. The words left her mouth before her brain had finished forming them. Richard turned around. I accept, Emily repeated, her voice trembling. But on one condition. No touching, no kissing, and I take care of the kids my way. No interference. Richard looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Deal. Emily sighed. This is absolutely going to end badly. He opened the car door for her. Or it might be the best mistake of your life. Emily took a breath, gathered her bags, and got into the car. As it pulled away into the rain, she stared out the window, still not entirely convinced any of this was actually happening. And that was how, soaked, lost, and about to step into something she didn't yet understand, Emily Parker took the first step toward a life that was about to change completely. The car moved through the wet streets of New York while Emily watched Richard from the corner of her eye. He drove upright, eyes fixed forward, saying absolutely nothing. The silence built until it had a physical weight to it, the kind that made Emily consider opening the door and rolling out a red light just for the variety. She cleared her throat. Nothing. He kept driving as though she were a piece of furniture that had wandered into the passenger seat. Emily rolled her eyes and decided someone had to break the silence. So, she began with a nervous smile. Do you always offer marriage contracts to soaking wet strangers? Or, am I getting special treatment? Richard didn't even blink. You were in the right place at the right time. Wow, how romantic, she said, pressing a hand to her chest. I'll save that line for our fake anniversary. He stayed serious, but Emily could have sworn his mouth twitched at the corner. Seriously, though, do you genuinely think this is going to work? She asked, pushing back her wet hair. I can barely cook rice without setting off a smoke alarm. And you want me looking after children? The children don't need a chef, Richard replied flatly. They need someone who stays. Emily went quiet for a second, absorbing that. Then she let out a short laugh. I see. You want someone desperate enough not to quit. Congratulations, you found your candidate. I genuinely have nowhere else to be. Richard finally glanced sideways at her. That's precisely why you're ideal. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. You know, Richard, you have a real gift for making someone feel chosen and offended in the same sentence. He didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the road. Emily crossed her arms and continued narrating to herself. Okay, let's recap. I'm moving into your house, pretending to be your wife, raising children I've never met, and in exchange I get shelter and a paycheck. Basically, I just accepted a job based entirely on emotional desperation. Richard nodded. Serious. That's a fair summary. She laughed a little hysterically. My mother always said I make bad decisions. Now I have documented proof. The car turned onto a wide avenue, and the city lights began to thin out. Emily frowned. Hey, where exactly are we going? Because if it's somewhere isolated, fair warning, I've seen enough thrillers to know how this ends. Richard sighed. We're going to my house. Oh, of course. The mysterious millionaire's house, where fake wives are recruited. Very normal. He glanced at her, mildly irritated now. If you'd like to get out, I'll stop the car. Emily raised both hands in surrender. Relax, boss. I'm just trying to lighten the mood here. You're more serious than a funeral. Richard rolled his eyes and pressed the accelerator slightly harder. A few minutes later, the car passed through a massive automatic gate. Emily leaned forward to get a better look, and then she saw it. A mansion rose out of the dark like something from a different century, modern and enormous. White walls and floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by a garden the size of a public park. "Is this a house or a five-star hotel?" she asked, eyes glued to the building. "It's my house," Richard said, pulling up to the entrance. Emily got out, still staring, completely stunned, her feet sinking slightly into the soft welcome mat at the door. "You live here?" "Alone. With my children," he corrected, retrieving her suitcases from the trunk. Emily followed him to the front door. He unlocked it, revealing a soaring entrance hall. Marble staircase, crystal chandeliers, ceilings that seemed designed to make a person feel appropriately small. She stepped in slowly, almost afraid to touch anything. "Okay, I'm now fairly convinced you're a prince in disguise." Richard set the bags down and removed his jacket. "Just a businessman." "Sure. And I'm just a former waitress who now apparently lives in a palace." Totally ordinary. The silence in the house felt almost engineered. Emily looked around, impressed by the spotless order of everything. "This place is eerily quiet," she said, walking to the center of the hall. "Where are the kids?" She had barely finished the sentence when two voices echoed down from above. "Get him, Max." "No, you get him." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. The little angels?" Richard closed his eyes, bracing for impact. Two small figures appeared at the top of the stairs, dark-haired boys with bright, mischievous eyes, sprinting like a small natural disaster. "Alex, throw it," the younger one shouted, laughing. The older one grabbed a pillow off the landing and launched it down the staircase. It sailed directly toward Emily. She jumped sideways, nearly tripping over her own bags. "Whoa, that was close," she said, laughing nervously. More pillows followed. She dodged one, then another, but the third caught her squarely in the face. "Oh," she caught on the rebound. "Okay, who threw that one?" The boys froze halfway down the stairs, eyes wide. A brown dog came charging after them, barking with the enthusiasm of an animal who has decided this is the best day of its life. Richard let out a long sigh and pressed two fingers to his forehead. "Alex, Mux, down here, now." The two of them descended slowly, the posture of children who know exactly how much trouble they're in. The dog followed, still barking. Emily held the pillow and looked at the boys with open amusement. "So, you're the famous hurricanes." The older one, Alex, crossed his arms defensively. "Who are you?" "Good question," Emily said, turning to Richard. "Who am I exactly?" Richard took a breath. "This is Emily. She's going to be living here with us." Max's eyes went wide. "Forever." "For now," Richard said. Alex frowned. "Are you the new nanny?" Emily made a face. "Nanny? Me? No. I'm more of a temporary house guest who's going to try her best not to let you destroy the place." Mux left. "I like her." Alex still looked skeptical. "The last nanny lasted 3 days." Emily crouched to their eye level. "Look, I'm not a nanny, but I promise I'm a lot more fun, and I could survive a pillow assault." Mux grinned. Alex remained unconvinced but said nothing further. Richard stepped in. "That's enough for today. Go to your room." The boys obeyed, grumbling their way back up the stairs, the dog trailing behind them. Emily stood and fixed her hair. "So they're always like this?" "Always," Richard said. She laughed. "Okay, this is going to be interesting." Richard picked up one of her bags. "Let me show you to your room." Emily followed him up the staircase, taking in the paintings, the elegant furniture, the spotless precision of every surface. He stopped at a door on the second floor and opened it. The room was enormous, a king-size bed, a walk-in closet roughly the size of her former apartment, and a window overlooking a garden lit softly against the dark. "This is my room?" she asked, barely believing it. "Yes," Richard said, setting her bag down. She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "I'm sleeping here, alone, in this enormous bed." "Correct." Emily sat on the edge of the mattress to test it and immediately understood Why people wrote poetry about good furniture. Okay, maybe this deal isn't completely terrible. Richard remained in the doorway. We'll discuss the rules tomorrow. Rest. He left, closing the door behind him. Emily stayed in the luxurious room, still working through everything that had happened. The high ceiling, the expensive furniture, the dream of a bed. She lay back, sinking into it. Okay, Emily, she murmured. You just agreed to move in with a deeply serious millionaire, take care of 2 small tornadoes, and pretend to be his wife. This will either be your downfall or your lucky break. She closed her eyes, exhausted but smiling, and for the first time in weeks, slept without a single worry pulling at her. The next morning, Emily woke to birdsong outside the window. She blinked at the unfamiliar white ceiling above her for several seconds before remembering where she was. Oh, right, she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. The millionaire's mansion. Almost forgot my life had turned into a movie script. She got up, dressed, and followed the smell of fresh coffee down to the kitchen and stopped dead in the doorway. Alex was standing on a stool in front of the stove, holding a frying pan, and whatever was in that bowl beside him was definitely not pancake batter. Good morning, Emily said, attempting calm. What are you doing? Alex turned with the proud expression of a chef unveiling a masterpiece. Making pancakes. Emily peered into the bowl. Water, flour, and what was unmistakably laundry detergent. Alex, sweetheart, she said, gently removing the bowl from his hands. This isn't sugar. It's soap. He frowned. But it says powder. Laundry powder. Not the kind you eat. She laughed, turning off the stove. If we'd cooked this, we'd have left the breakfast table blowing bubbles. Alex thought about this for a second and burst out laughing. That would have been funny. It would have. Your stomach would not have agreed, Emily said, sliding the bowl out of reach. A loud meow echoed from the living room. Emily turned. What was that? Another meow, louder and considerably more distressed. She ran into the living room and found Max attempting to tie the family cat to a jump rope. The cat, a blue-eyed Siamese with an expression of pure betrayal, was fighting the situation with everything it had. Max! Emily rushed over. What are you doing? Teaching him to jump rope? Max said, in the tone of someone explaining something obvious. Emily held back a laugh and untied the cat, who fled with the speed of an animal that had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. Max, cats don't jump rope, and they really don't appreciate being tied up. He crossed his arms. But I wanted to play with him. Then play with a ball, or that feather toy. No tying anything to anything, okay? Max pouted but nodded. Emily returned to the kitchen and found Alex back on the stool, attempting to pry open a jelly jar with a kitchen knife. No. She crossed the room and gently took the knife from his hands. Rule number 1. No knives without supervision. I am hungry, Alex protested. Then sit down, and I'll make actual pancakes. No soap this time, I promise. Both boys sat at the table, watching her with the focused suspicion of small judges as she gathered ingredients. You actually know how to cook? Alex asked. Sort of, Emily admitted, cracking eggs into a bowl. But at minimum, I know the difference between sugar and detergent. Max laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. As she mixed the batter, she began humming. The boys exchanged a glance. The last nanny didn't sing, Max said. She just yelled, Alex added. Emily paused. She yelled at you? All the time, Alex said, swinging his legs. She said we were terrible. Emily made a face. That's a shame. You're not terrible. You're just a little too creative. Mux beamed. I like you. Thanks, sweetie. I like you too. She poured the batter into the pan. But let's agree on something. No soap in the food, and no tying up the animals. Both boys nodded solemnly. As the pancakes cooked, heavy footsteps came down the stairs. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed immaculately as always. Dark suit, tie, the works. He took in the scene. 2 seated boys, no visible chaos, the kitchen relatively intact, Emily at the stove. Good morning, he said, somewhat warily. Morning, boss, Emily said, flipping a pancake. Coffee? Or would you prefer a soap smoothie? Richard frowned. Soap. Alex raised a hand. That was me, but Emily saved me. Richard looked at Emily, who simply shrugged. Your son nearly invented the world's first bubble pancake. Bold. Dangerous. Richard sighed and poured himself coffee, settling at the head of the table. All set, Emily said, serving the boys. Official pancakes. No cleaning products involved. Max took a bite, eyes lighting up. This is good. Alex nodded. Way better than cereal. Emily smiled, pleased, and sat down to her own plate. Richard watched quietly. For the first time in months, the boys were calm, eating without complaint, without mess. So, Emily said, what's the plan today? School. No. Alex said, it's Saturday. Right. Emily said, tapping her forehead. Lost track of the days. So what do you do on Saturdays? Nothing. Max said, bored. Dad works. Emily looked at Richard, who was drinking his coffee, without comment. You work on Saturdays? I have meetings. She rolled her eyes. Of course. Resting is strictly a weekday activity. Richard looked at her evenly. I have responsibilities. And I have 2 kids here who need some fun, Emily said. So today I'll handle it. You can go work in peace. He hesitated, then agreed, finishing his coffee and standing. I'll be back this afternoon. Bye, Dad, the boys called. The moment he left, Emily clapped her hands. All right, gentlemen, what do you want to do today? Video games. Alex said. Outside. Much countered. How about both? Emily suggested. Games this morning, outside this afternoon. Deal. Both boys agreed enthusiastically. The day flew by. Emily played video games with them, letting them win sometimes and crushing them mercilessly other times for educational purposes. In the afternoon, she organized an improvised treasure hunt in the garden, and they ran and shouted and laughed, and Emily realized it had been a very long time since she'd had this much fun. When Richard returned that evening, he found the 3 of them in the garden, covered in dirt, laughing uncontrollably. He watched from the window, genuinely surprised. The boys were listening to her without any of the usual resistance. No tantrums. No jilling. Emily spotted him and waved. He nodded back, serious as always, though something in his expression had shifted. Later that night, after the boys had bathed and gone to sleep, Emily found Richard in the living room with his tablet. Hi, she said, settling into the chair across from him. I think I survived day 1, she said. They listened to you, Richard said. I know. Shocking, right? He was quiet for a moment. Thank you. You did well today. Emily blinked. Wow. A thank you. Should I be recording this? The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. Almost. You know, Richard, you should try relaxing occasionally, Emily went on, leaning back. You're so serious. Like a robot in a tie. He raised an eyebrow. A robot in a tie? Yes, she laughed. Fully programmed. No emotion, permanent autopilot. Work, meetings, coffee, repeat. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time, the corner of his mouth genuinely lifted. Maybe, he said, returning his attention to the tablet. Emily smiled, triumphant, and stood. Good night, robot. Good night, Emily. She went upstairs with the distinct feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work out. In the days that followed, Emily discovered that managing Alex and Max was like trying to domesticate 2 small weather systems. There was the morning she woke to a crash and found them attempting to use a heavy armchair as a sled down the stairs. There was the breakfast where Max threw bread at the cat while Alex balanced a spoon on his nose with concerning dedication. There was an afternoon she spent mopping the floor while singing into a broom handle, completely unaware that Alex was filming the entire thing from behind the couch. This is going to be incredible, Alex whispered to Max, holding the tablet steady. She's singing so badly, Max giggled. Emily, oblivious, kept dancing and mopping at the same time. Meanwhile, in Richard's office, a virtual meeting with 3 Japanese investors was in full swing. So, Mr. Lancaster, we're interested in expanding the partnership, said one of the men on screen. Richard nodded businesslike. We can review the contract terms. At that exact moment, the office door opened. Richard, where's the sugar? I cannot find it, and I swear I looked everywhere. Emily stopped mid-sentence, registering the screen. Oh, the 3 investors blinked, startled. Richard closed his eyes. Emily, he said very evenly, I'm in a meeting. Right. Sorry, everyone. She gave the screen an awkward wave. Sugar. Never mind. Bye. She fled, closing the door perhaps slightly harder than necessary. Richard turned back to the screen, reassembling his composure. My apologies. That was my assistant. One of the investors smiled. She seems charming. Richard cleared his throat. Shall we continue? Later that afternoon, the dancing resumed. Emily, the broom, and now both boys, who'd abandoned all pretense of filming in secret and were instead recording an entirely staged music video with choreography of their own invention. This came out perfect, Alex said, reviewing the footage. Let me see, Emily said, grabbing the tablet. The video showed her off-key and joyfully uncoordinated, with the boys doing equally chaotic backup moves. This is hilarious, she laughed. We look like a rock band that gave up halfway through. I'm posting it, Alex announced. Posting it where? Emily frowned. Dad's account. We use it all the time. Alex, no. She lunged for the tablet, but it was too late. Done, Alex said proudly. Emily stared at him. Your dad has a public account? Yeah, we always use it. Emily put her face in her hands. I'm going to get fired. On day 5. That has to be some kind of record. The video went viral within hours. Thousands of views, comments calling her the funniest nanny in New York and the CEO's best employee. Emily sat frozen on the couch, scrolling through it with growing alarm. Richard appeared in the doorway holding his phone, his expression somewhere between irritated and incredulous. Emily, my office. Now. She followed him in, swallowing hard. Can you explain this? He held out the phone. I didn't know they were going to post it, Emily stammered. It was an accident. My image is everywhere. People are discussing my personal life. I know. But look at the bright side. Everyone thinks it's adorable. Adorable? Yes. Look at the comments. Emily grabbed his phone and read aloud. What an amazing nanny. His kids are so lucky. The CEO has a heart. See? You look human. Richard sighed, rubbing his forehead. This is a disaster. Emily bit her lip, genuinely guilty. I am sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. He watched the video again in silence. And then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Are you laughing? He watched the clip a second time. Her twirling the broom, the boys jumping around her, and laughed harder. You're a genuinely terrible dancer. Hey, I dance with heart, Emily said, crossing her arms in mock offense. With heart and zero rhythm, Richard added, still laughing. She couldn't help it. She laughed too. Okay, maybe I'm not destined for a pop career. Richard's expression sobered, but something in it had loosened. Just warn me before posting anything. Please. Promise. No more accidental viral fame. He nodded and returned to his work. Emily left, relieved. What she didn't know was that the video had reached someone else entirely. Across town, a stylish blonde woman watched the clip on her phone, a calculating smile spreading across her face. Rebecca Whitmore, Richard's ex-fiancée. So Richard hired a nanny, she murmured. Interesting. She picked up her phone and dialed. Hello. I'd like to arrange a visit to the Lancaster estate. Tomorrow morning, if possible. Thank you. She hung up, satisfied. Emily, of course, knew none of this. That night, lying in bed, she replayed the day. Went viral, almost got fired, made the robot laugh. She murmured, smiling. Quite a day. Tomorrow, she didn't yet know, would be considerably more complicated. The doorbell rang the next morning while Emily was mid-pancake. I'll get it, Alex shouted, sprinting for the door before Emily could stop him. A blonde woman swept in wearing a fitted red dress, designer sunglasses, and the confidence of someone who has never once doubted she belonged exactly where she was standing. Hello, darlings, she said sweetly. Aunt Rebecca's here to visit. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair in rollers, apron dusted with flour, a smear of chocolate on her cheek. Rebecca removed her sunglasses and looked Emily over with a smile that had nothing warm in it. Oh, hello. You must be the new housekeeper. Nanny, Emily said. Emily, how sweet. Rebecca held out 2 enormous shopping bags. Be a dear and take these to the living room. Emily looked at the bags, then at Rebecca, and produced the most insincere smile she could manage. Of course. Would you also like a fresh juice? Perhaps your car washed. Rebecca blinked, momentarily thrown. Max came running in. Rebecca, did you bring presents? Of course I did, sweetheart. Rebecca knelt with a dazzling smile. Amazing toys. Emily set the bags down and crossed her arms, watching the scene unfold. Rebecca produced two extravagantly expensive remote control cars. Whoa! Alex grabbed one immediately. Thanks, Rebecca. Max added, delighted. Rebecca smiled at Emily triumphantly. It's always nice to spoil them, isn't it? Absolutely, Emily said. Nothing builds affection like expensive plastic. Rebecca ignored this and stood. Where's Richard? His office, Emily said flatly. Wonderful. Rebecca brushed past her deliberately. Excuse me. Emily stood rigid, gripping the spatula like a weapon. Who is she? Max asked. A very polite person, Emily said, deeply sarcastic. Now, shall we finish breakfast? As the boys returned to the kitchen, Emily heard Rebecca's voice drifting from the office. Richard, I missed you. Emily rolled her eyes and hit the pan with the spatula slightly harder than was strictly necessary. In the office, Richard looked up to find Rebecca already standing in his doorway. Rebecca. His voice was neutral. What are you doing here? Checking on you, she said, walking in and closing the door. And meeting the new nanny. She's interesting. Richard sighed. She's doing a good job. I'm sure she is. Rebecca perched on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs. But you know you can always count on me. I've always been here for you and the boys. Richard leaned back. Rebecca, we ended things 2 years ago. I know. She touched his arm. But I still care. And I think you do too. He gently removed his arm from under her hand. I have work to do. Of course. She smiled like nothing had happened. We should have dinner sometime. Catch up. Maybe, Richard said, turning back to his computer. Rebecca left with the satisfied look of someone who has planted exactly the seed she intended to plant. In the kitchen, Emily served the boys while trying not to think about Rebecca. She's annoying, Alex said, chewing. Alex, Emily said, fighting a laugh. It's true, Max insisted. She only shows up when she wants something. Emily found herself wondering what exactly that something was. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Richard found Emily watching TV in the living room. Can I talk to you? He asked. She turned off the TV. Sure. He sat beside her. Does Rebecca bother you? Emily nearly choked. What? No. Why would she bother me? You've been off all day. Off. She laughed nervously. Not at all. She's just very elegant and perfumed and irritating. Richard raised an eyebrow. Irritating? Yes. Emily gestured broadly. She came in giving orders, treated everyone like staff, and had the nerve to call me cute. Richard almost smiled. She's always been like that. Then why did you date her? The question slipped out before Emily could stop it. Richard was quiet for a moment. Because I thought it was the right thing to do. Something twisted in Emily's chest, and she ignored it. Well, terrible taste. He let out a low laugh. Maybe. They sat in silence. Emily's heart was racing for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely, and she stood abruptly. I'm going to bed. Good night, Emily. She paused without turning around. Thanks for taking care of the boys. You're welcome. Robot. She went up the stairs quickly, before he could see the color rising in her face. 2 days later, a notification pulled Emily's attention to her phone. The headline read, Richard Lancaster and ex-fiancée Rebecca Whitmore back together. Below it, a photo. Rebecca pressed against Richard's arm at some event, both of them smiling, looking very much like a couple. Emily's stomach dropped. This is ridiculous, she muttered, unable to stop staring at the image. She went downstairs and found Richard staring at his own phone. Did you see this? She asked, holding up her screen. He sighed. I did. Is it true? Are you two back together? No. He met her eyes. It was a business event. She showed up and took that photo without me noticing. Emily crossed her arms. And you couldn't have stopped her? He frowned. Why are you so upset about this? I'm not upset. You are. Emily opened her mouth to argue and found nothing came out properly. It complicates things. What things? Her face was heating up. Things. The deal. The image. All of it. He kept looking at her like he was reading something she hadn't said out loud. Emily couldn't handle it. "I need to go do something," she said, and bolted up the stairs. She locked herself in her room and sat on the bed, staring at the photo again. The anger didn't make sense to her. She wasn't supposed to care. It was a deal. A contract. But seeing Rebecca beside him had set something on fire inside her. And for the first time, Emily understood exactly what that something was. "No, no, no," she whispered, tossing the phone onto the bed. But it was true. Downstairs, Richard stood very still in the living room, staring up the staircase. He had figured out, too. Emily was jealous. And, strangely, that realization made him smile. A few days later, Richard knocked on her door while she was deciding between two dresses. "Come in," she said. "We need to talk about tonight's dinner," Richard said, businesslike. "What dinner?" "With the Japanese investors. You're coming." Emily dropped the dresses. "Me? What?" "Because you're my wife. At least, that's what they need to believe." "Oh, right. The fake wife. Almost forgot my job description." "It matters, Emily. These investors are conservative. They value family and stability. So, you want me to pretend to be the perfect wife, smile politely, and avoid saying anything stupid?" "Exactly." She crossed her arms. "And if I say no, you won't. It's part of the deal." She sighed. "Fine. But if I embarrass you, that's on you." He almost smiled. "I'll pick you up at 7. At 7 sharp, Emily came down the stairs in a green dress, heels, hair in an elegant updo, feeling entirely like an imposter. Richard, waiting in the hall in a black suit, looked up from his phone and stopped. "You look beautiful," he said, with genuine surprise. Emily gave a dramatic bow. "Thank you." I even attempted civilized. The restaurant was the kind of place with crystal chandeliers and bow-tied waiters. The three investors, middle-aged, formal, attentive, greeted Richard warmly, and Emily worked her way through unfamiliar courses with a determined smile, holding her own through a careful conversation about how busy Richard was and how present he managed to be despite it. "So, Mrs. Lancaster," Mr. Tanaka said warmly, "what is it like living with such a busy man?" "Interesting," Emily said. "He works so much I occasionally forget he lives there." The men laughed. "But he's dedicated," she continued. "And when he is home, he's wonderful with the boys." "You have children?" one of the investors asked. "Two," Richard said. "Alex and Max." "How lovely," Mr. Tanaka said. "Family is everything." "Absolutely," Emily agreed. "And those two are an entire adventure." Everything was going beautifully until the restaurant door opened. Rebecca Whitmore walked in wearing white, her smile sharp enough to cut. Emily felt her stomach drop. Rebecca crossed to their table as though she'd been invited. "Richard, what a coincidence." Richard stood, visibly tense. "Rebecca, darling." She glanced at the investors. "Sorry to interrupt." Rebecca Whitmore, old friend of Richard's. "How nice," Emily said. Old friends do love crashing private dinners. Rebecca ignored this entirely and turned to the table. "Hope you're enjoying yourselves." Richard always had great taste in restaurants. "Thank you, Rebecca," Richard said, trying to close the conversation. "But we're in the middle of business discussions." "Of course." Rebecca's eyes found Emily. "And you must be the new wife?" Emily lifted her chin. "Yes. And you must be the ex who hasn't moved on." The investors went quiet, watching. Rebecca laughed, brittle. "How cute. But Richard and I have history, sweetheart. Something you wouldn't understand." Emily kept her voice calm despite the rising heat in her chest. "You're right. I genuinely don't understand how someone loses a man like this and still lingers like a ghost." Mr. Tanaka let out a quiet laugh. Rebecca flushed. "I was here before you ever showed up. And yet you didn't stay," Emily said sweetly. "Interesting, isn't it?" Rebecca's fists clenched. "You don't know anything." Richard stood and took Emily's arm. "That's enough." But Emily wasn't finished. "Rebecca, you can show up wherever you'd like, but it won't change the fact that he chose to move forward. Maybe you should too." The entire dining room had turned to watch. Rebecca opened her mouth, and nothing came out. And then, without warning, Richard pulled Emily close and kissed her. Firm, unexpected, entirely public. The room went silent for a beat. Then applause broke out. Emily stood frozen when he pulled back, completely stunned. Rebecca, scarlet with humiliation, turned and stormed out. "What a beautiful couple," Mr. Tanaka said, beaming. Richard sat back down as though nothing had happened. Emily, still standing, tried to remember how breathing worked. "Emily," Richard said quietly. "Sit down." She sat, hands trembling. Dinner continued, but she could barely focus on anything beyond the memory of the kiss replaying itself. The car ride home was silent and heavy. "You broke the contract," Emily said finally. "It was necessary." "Necessary?" She turned to him. "You kissed me in front of everyone. And it worked." Rebecca left. The investors were thrilled. "You can't just kiss someone without warning." "I know." His grip tightened on the wheel. "I'm sorry." She said nothing. "But it was necessary," he repeated, softer this time. Emily looked at him, tried to read what was underneath the sentence. Necessary for the investors. Or necessary for something else? He didn't answer the question she hadn't asked. When they reached the mansion, Richard parked and shut off the engine. Neither of them moved. "Emily." He finally looked at her. She turned her face away. "What? I shouldn't have done that." Something tightened in her chest. "No, you shouldn't have." She got out and walked into the house without looking back. Richard sat alone in the car, staring at his hands. He had broken the contract. And worse, he didn't regret it. Upstairs, Emily locked her bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. Fingers pressed her lips, the kiss still entirely present. "What is happening to me?" she whispered. But she already knew. She was falling in love, and that had never been part of the deal. The next morning, Emily came down to breakfast trying to act normal, her heart picking up every time she thought about the previous night. "Why are you guys acting weird?" Max asked, chewing cereal. "We're not acting weird," Emily said quickly. "You are," Alex insisted. "Dad's staring at you, and your face is all red." Emily nearly choked on her coffee. "I'm not red." Richard cleared his throat and returned to the newspaper. The boys exchanged a look that suggested a conspiracy was already in motion. It was. Within the hour, Alex and Max had decided to play matchmaker, and their first scheme involved Max locking himself in Richard's closet and Emily being summoned to rescue him. A plan that required Emily and Richard to be in the same room searching for a key, which they were, briefly, while the boys watched from a safe distance with poorly concealed grins. "You two planned this, didn't you?" Emily said, narrowing her eyes at them afterward. "No," they said in unison, giggling. That afternoon, while the boys played in the garden, Emily's curiosity finally got the better of her. She noticed a locked door on the third floor weeks ago and had never investigated. She found Richard's spare keys on his dresser and tried them one by one until the third worked. The room beyond it was an art studio. Easels, brushes, canvases everywhere, all painted with evident care. Landscapes, portraits, flowers. In one corner, a wooden box held a stack of yellowed letters. She opened one and read, "Richard, I promise I'll paint our future together. Every moment, every smile. I'll love you forever. Claire." Emily felt her chest tighten. Claire, Richard's late wife. She read several more, all full of warmth and hope, until she reached the final one. "If anything happens to me, take care of the boys and don't blame yourself. Life is unpredictable. Be happy, Richard. You deserve it." Emily closed the letter, eyes stinging. Now she understood. Richard wasn't cold. He was carrying guilt he had never set down. She returned everything carefully and locked the door behind her. She found him later in the garden, watching the sunset. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. He nodded. "I went into the studio," she said finally. He tensed. "You shouldn't have." "I know. I'm sorry. But now I understand." "Understand what?" "Why you keep everything locked away. Why you built that wall. It's none of your business." "I know. But I care." She took a breath. "You blame yourself, don't you? For her death." His fists clenched. "I wasn't there. She had an accident, and I was away on a business trip. I never got to say goodbye." "Richard, there's no way you could have known." "I could have stayed," he said, voice low. "I chose work, and I lost her." Emily touched his arm gently. "She wouldn't want you living like this, stuck in guilt." He looked at her, eyes wet. How do you know? Because I read the letters. She loved you. She wanted you to be happy. He said nothing for a long moment. You deserve to be happy again, Emily said softly. And the boys need a father who's present, not a man stuck in the past. I don't know how to let go. You don't have to let go entirely. You just have to keep living. She'll always be in your heart, but you have to live. A tear slipped down his face. Emily put her arms around him, and Richard let himself fall apart, quietly, for the first time in years. They stayed like that for a while. When he finally pulled back, he wiped his face. Thank you. You're welcome. Robot. He let out a weak laugh. You're never going to stop calling me that, are you? Never. They both laughed, and for a moment, everything between them felt light. And then Richard's phone rang. His face went pale as he listened. What do you mean? What is it? Emily asked. He hung up tense. Rebecca. She leaked it to the press. He showed her his phone. Our marriage. She's exposed it as fake. Emily's stomach dropped. The headline read, CEO Richard Lancaster and supposed wife faking marriage to deceive investors. This could ruin everything, Emily whispered. She did it, Richard said. She finally destroyed me. We'll fix this. How? How do we fix a lie the entire world already knows? Neither of them had an answer. By morning, the gates were lined with reporters. Emily watched from the window, stomach in knots, as Richard stood in the living room watching a news anchor describe his marriage as a fraud designed to impress investors. Photos of Emily, at the gala, at the cafe, scrolled across the screen alongside the words former waitress with no qualifications. I'm going to be sick, Emily said. Don't read the comments, Richard warned. She did anyway. They were exactly as brutal as she expected. They hate me, she whispered. They don't know you, Richard said, stepping closer. She stepped back. It doesn't matter. Everyone thinks I'm a fraud. He scheduled a press conference for that afternoon. Emily watched from the window as Richard stood before a crowd of cameras and reporters. I'm here to set the record straight, he said, raising a hand for quiet. When I met Emily Parker, I was lost. My children were out of control, and I was too buried in work to be the father they needed. Emily is not a gold digger. She's an extraordinary woman who turned my house into a home. She brought life back into this family. He paused. Yes, our marriage began as an arrangement, but it became something real, and I won't stay silent while anyone tries to destroy the reputation of the woman I love. Emily's hands flew to her mouth. He said, love. Emily Parker is my wife, Richard continued. For real. And anyone who attempts to slander her will answer to me. He turned and walked back into the house without taking further questions. Inside, Emily was crying. You didn't have to do that, she said, voice shaking. I had to. Now everyone knows it started as a lie. You're going to lose contracts. Investors. I don't care. He held her face gently. I only care about you. Emily closed her eyes, tears falling freely. I can't stay, Richard. He froze. What? I brought this on you. All of it. She stepped back. You and the boys deserve peace. All I've brought is scandal. Emily. No. I'm leaving. She turned and went upstairs before he could stop her. She found Alex and Max in their room, and the goodbye was the hardest thing she'd done in her life. Max crying that they liked her, Alex insisting she couldn't go because she was their mom now, all three of them holding each other and crying together until Emily finally pulled herself away, kissed their foreheads, and went downstairs to a waiting taxi. When Richard returned home that evening and found her room empty, drawers open, closet bare, he sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. She left, Dad, Alex said from the doorway, his voice breaking. Richard stared out the window at the corner where Emily's taxi had disappeared and understood that he had lost something far more valuable than any contract. The days that followed were the worst Richard had ever lived through. The house was unbearably quiet. The boys barely ate, barely spoke, refused to listen to anything he said. You should go get her, Alex told him one evening, with the simple conviction of a child. Like in the movies. You run, say sorry, and she comes back. It's not that simple. Why not? You like her. She likes you. It's simple. Richard had no answer. That night, he went to Claire's old studio and reread her final letter. Be happy, Richard. You deserve it. He understood, finally, that Claire had wanted exactly what Emily had given him, and that he'd let it walk out the door. He called Emily's number. Voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He needed to find her in person. Across the city, Emily had rented a small room and found work at a cozy cafe in Brooklyn run by a kind older woman named Helen. Everyone deserves a fresh start, Helen had said, hiring her on the spot. Emily threw herself into the work and tried not to think about Richard or the boys. It was impossible. Every child who walked in reminded her of Alex and Max. Every black coffee order reminded her of Richard. A week later, Richard finally found the courage. He called every cafe in New York until, on the 13th call, Helen confirmed she had an Emily working there. He walked in the next day. Emily was behind the counter, laughing at something a customer had said, looking lighter than he'd seen her in weeks. When she spotted him, her smile vanished. "Richard," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I came," he hesitated, "to get a coffee." "You crossed the whole city for coffee." "And to say I'm sorry." The cafe had gone quiet, everyone watching. "Richard, don't do this here." "I have to." He stepped closer. "I'll let you walk away when I should have asked you to stay. I brought the scandal. I ruined your reputation." "You brought life," he said, looking her in the eyes. "You taught me how to live again, how to be a real father, how to feel something besides guilt." Tears rose in her eyes. "Richard, stop." "No." He shook his head. "I spent years stuck in the past, and you freed me from it. You turned my house into a home, and I was a fool not to realize I loved you until it was almost too late." Emily covered her mouth, crying openly now. Richard dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of the cafe. "Emily Parker, I'm not asking as a CEO. I'm asking as a man, as a father, as someone who truly loves you." He took her hand. "Give me a second chance. Not because of contract, because we love each other." The entire cafe waited breathless. "Richard, the boys love you," Emily said, trembling. "I love you." "Then please, come home." She tried to remember every reason she'd left. She couldn't hold onto a single one. "Get up," she said, voice breaking. He stood, still holding her hand. Emily pulled him close and kissed him, right there, in front of everyone. The cafe erupted in applause. "If I come back," Emily said, pulling away, "no more lies. No more contracts. Just us. For real." "For real," Richard promised. "All right then," Emily said, smiling through tears. "I'm coming back." They returned to the mansion together. Not as employer and employee, not as a deal, but as two people who had finally found each other for real. The boys ran into her arms the moment they saw her, and the house, which had gone cold and silent, was full of life again. In the days that followed, the old routines returned, gentler this time. One morning, while Emily made pancakes, Richard walked in holding an envelope. "What's that?" she asked. "Our old contract," he said on the table. "Came to return it." He tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. "It's over. We don't need it. So we're contract-free now. Just us. For real." He stepped closer, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Emily Parker, will you marry me? For real this time?" She stared at the ring, then at him, laughing through sudden tears. "You picked the kitchen while I'm making pancakes. I thought it was romantic. You're terrible at romance. I know, but I love you. I love you too. Robot, is that a yes?" Giant housed two hilarious kids, a workaholic husband who finally learned how to smile. She slid the ring on her finger, yes. "Ido." He pulled her close and kissed her while the pancakes burned on the stove. Months later, the Lancaster mansion was unrecognizable, not in structure, but in spirit. Flowers everywhere. White chairs arranged across the lawn. A rose-covered arch at the center of the garden. Emily walked down the aisle hand in hand with Alex and Max, one on each side, both in small crooked-tie suits, both grinning with pride. "We're going to walk you out," Alex had announced earlier that day. "Thanks for staying," he told her, sincere at the bottom of the stairs. Emily's eyes filled. "I was never going anywhere." At the altar, Richard waited in a gray suit, his smile entirely genuine. "When I met you," he said during his vows, "I was lost, stuck in the past. You came into my life like a hurricane, messy, Unpredictable, impossible to ignore. You turned my house into a home. You were the best investment I ever made. Investment. Emily laughed through tears. Terrible at romance. The guests laughed. Richard, Emily said during her own vows, I had nothing when I met you. For soaked suitcases and a broken shoe. You gave me a roof, a job, a chance. But you gave me a family. She looked at the boys. I promise to be the best mother, wife, and partner I can be, even if that means burning pancakes occasionally. I love you, robot, she said. I love you, hurricane, he replied. They kissed as the guests applauded, and Alex and Max jumped up shouting, Our mom! Our mom! The reception ran long into the night. Bad dancing, warm speeches, lights strung through the trees. At one point, Emily and Richard stepped away from the celebration to watch it from a distance. We did it, Emily said, resting her head on his shoulder. We did, Richard agreed. Do you still think I was a good investment? The best one, Emily said, smiling. You're getting good at this. At what? Holmancy. That's your fault, she said. You corrupted me. And I'll keep doing it, he said. Get ready. They laughed, holding each other, watching the boys attempt and fail to dance with any rhythm whatsoever on the makeshift dance floor. It's genetic, Richard said. Emily turned to him. Thank you for letting me be part of this, for believing in me, for loving me. Thank you for showing up that rainy night, he said, for staying. They kissed again under the string lights, surrounded by everything that mattered. Laughter, music, a family built not from a contract, but from something that had grown real along the way. What did you think of Emily and Richard's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story.